various options and nothing was working. So then I thought, well, let's try that, and that worked. So
absolutely, that'll be fun.
Yeah. So you've started recording now.
I did.
So we have to be careful what we say.
Yes. Everything positive, right? Well, I know we have some folks from the different coalitions and Chandler, who's one of my new staff people, and I believe a couple folks from United Way that'll be joining as well. So
great.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Brenda.
Good morning.
Looks like you have a real background behind you. Karen has a fake one.
Yes.
I think I like yours better, Karen.
Yeah, it's a little more entertaining than what I have at home, so. So is anybody planning to go anywhere warm soon? No.
I have a colleague who's going to Florida. Feels like going to Florida is safer than North Dakota at this point with the COVID, because they've already had their big surge.
Yes.
I'm not planning.
I just love fall. It's just so beautiful, and it's been such a lovely fall that I wanna enjoy every day of fall that we can get. So we know what's coming, right?
Yes.
That's what I was gonna say. I think I'm not planning on going anywhere until it's warmer, you know, or to colder. I mean, like.
Yeah. For sure. Good morning, Megan. Good morning, Ahmed.
Good morning.
So we're going to hang out a couple more minutes. I know we have some more people joining. Good morning, Thomas. And then we will get started. We're going to have a lot of interaction today. So even though we have to do this virtually, hopefully it'll still be really beneficial, and you'll won't be able, you know how sometimes you're on meetings and you can kind of like read research papers or type on other things. You guys get to work throughout this one, so it's going to be really fun. And we'll share some stories as we go through as well. So I think we have most of the people who will be joining. We might be getting a few more. Just so you know, we are recording this for people that will not be able to join us today. So to start with, why don't we do some introductions and just talk about your name, your role. So your name, your role, your pronouns, and then what is it that you're hoping to take away from today? And we can just do popcorn. So I'm going to start with Ken, since he has been the lead behind all of this. And yeah, we'll just go from there.
Okay, yeah, Ken Foster, professor at Concordia College, also director of community engagement, and I've had the privilege of convening the Moorhead Community Resilience Task Force, and pronouns are he, him. And I mentioned that Steve Iverson messaged me and said that he was having technical difficulties, so is currently not able to be heard by us.
All right. And what are you hoping to take away from today, Ken?
Oh yes, hoping to take away a cool new method to think about determining priorities and determining a clear plan for moving forward to make progress.
Great. And do you want to pick on somebody to popcorn to next?
Okay, pick on Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Ken. How are you? Good morning. And good morning to everyone else. My name is Thomas Hill. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact for United Way of Cass Clay. My pronouns are he and him. And what I'm hoping to gain out of this is really a better understanding of how we can use this results-based accountability framework to incentivize other organizations and other initiatives to have a clear understanding of how their roles and actions, no matter how big or small, can play a part in achieving a really greater common outcome. So just really looking for some guidance and hopefully some practical tips on how to do that. And so popcorning over, I will pick on Brenda.
Thanks, Thomas. I'm Brenda Richmond, and I'm with Moorhead Area Public Schools. And I have been really looking forward to this workshop, Karen, just like all of you, there's so many different areas that I'm overseeing and things that are on my plate. And I think just from a professional standpoint and personal standpoint, as well as our task force standpoint, I think that prioritization is just so vital, and I'm hoping to learn something good today. So, and I will pick on Noelle.
Oops. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Noelle Harden. I work with the University of Minnesota Extension. I'm a health and nutrition educator here in Moorhead. I joined a little late, but I'm gathering the question is, why did you come this morning? Honestly, it's a great group of people. Hi, everyone. And I'm a big fan of Karen. I think Karen is a great facilitator and really good at working with groups and kind of guiding them to find a strong common purpose. And yeah, I'm just excited to continue learning from you. Oh, and oh gosh, I don't know who's gone. Has Gabrielle gone? Okay, I choose Gabrielle then.
Thanks, Noelle. I'm Gabrielle Lummel. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator at Concordia. My pronouns are she, her, and I am looking forward to learning about the results-based accountability framework as we work to determine our priorities. So just excited to learn and be here today with all of you. Oh, and then I will pick on Deb.
Thanks, Gabrielle. I'm Deb White. I serve on the Moorhead City Council. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I just think, working on the Resilience Project and other things, I've had the great opportunities to be involved with things with some wonderful ideas and things that I think will be great for our community, and just wanting to make sure that we use all that information in the most effective way, so how do we use it for action and, make sure that we keep moving ahead. And so I'm looking for good tools to do that. And I'll have Cody go next.
I wanted to make sure my microphone was. Good morning, Cody Schuler. I'm with the Fargo-Moorhead Coalition to End Homelessness, and I'm the executive director there. My pronouns are he, him, and I think my takeaway is I'm always looking for tools. Doing coalition work, you have to set priorities, you have to wade through lots of stuff, and so loving tools. And when Tom had shared and Megan had shared a little bit about this, I was really super excited. So thanks for the invite and be able to be here today. I will pick on Chandler because I miss Chandler. Good to see you.
It's good to see you, Cody. I'm Chandler Esslinger, and I am the Community Health Specialist for Essentia, serving Fargo and Graceville. I use she, her pronouns, and what I'm really looking forward to today is learning more about the whole RBA framework, but also figuring out how to embed the RBA culture in all of our decision-making processes. So I'm very excited to be here. And I am going to toss it over to Taylor Sievertson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Sievertson. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Impact Manager with the Great Plains Food Bank. And I also serve on the steering committee for the Cass Clay Hunger Coalition and a couple other food systems spaces. The RBA process has been I've been in it for the long haul. I guess I started working with RBA 4 or so years ago when I first met Karen. And I'm just excited right now for kind of an opportunity to refresh and re-energize how the Hunger Coalition uses RBA and think about how we might use some of the refined tools in our own organization at the Great Plains Food Bank. Oh, and I might have missed who all has gone. Who is left here that hasn't yet introduced themselves? Ken, have you gone? You have, okay. Ahmed, have you gone? I'll pop it over to Ahmed then.
Good morning. My name is Ahmed Chill. I'm Senior Community Impact at United Way. He, him. I really am looking forward to learn from these amazing experts on my screen. So that's why I know there will be a lot of takeaways. So thank you. Oh, need to pick someone out. Forgot to. Let's see. This feels like a good game. Megan.
Good morning, Megan Jensen, she, her, Senior Community Impact Manager for United Way. Very similar to my colleagues and partners across the board, currently serving many roles within many coalitions and networks across many service areas. Really excited to potentially look at this as a shared language of community impact across hunger, homelessness, education, you name it, and really have a unified tool for all of our community initiatives to really look at community level change. And I'll go to Rory.
Good morning, Rory Beal, Clay County Public Health Promotion Director. I've participated in, I've heard Karen's presentation. I've participated in a results-based accountability session with the Hunger Coalition, but I have a thick head sometimes and I'd like a refresher to help some things translate or make their way to long-term memory. So I'm going to pass it. I don't think, Tim Hiller, have you been on the hot spot?
I have not. So my name is Tim Hiller. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Churches United. I have not done an RBO training before, so this will all be new to me and I'm very excited about it, but I am involved in various community organizations too. So I think, like everyone else has said so far, that this is going to be an exciting way to get shared language across multiple organizations. Who, is anyone not gone? I jumped on late, so I don't know. Bree, you can go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bree Langamo. I am the Director of Entrepreneurship at Concordia College. I go by she, her. Thank you for asking that question. Always appreciate it. I guess I'm really excited in basically anything that's results oriented. I think we all want to be results oriented in the work we do, and this seems like a process that will be effective and strategic in building a more resilient community. So I'm excited to learn as a lifelong learner. So, all right, I need, if you could raise your hand if you haven't gone. I'm also having a hard time with Teams. Okay, looks like Sydney, you are up.
Hi everyone, my name is Sydney Stock. I just graduated from Concordia in May of 2021, and now I'm sitting at Concordia as a Green Corps member under the AmeriCorps program. I am just super excited to be a part of the community, the greater Moorhead community, and just to sit alongside some really awesome people who are doing really great things. And I'm looking forward to the year. Is there anyone else that hasn't gone? Maybe that.
Yeah, I think we're, I know Steve was having technical difficulty, I believe that we heard, right? So if there's anybody that does pop on, I'm going to be sharing my screen as we go along. So a few things, if there's somebody who hasn't been introduced, feel free to speak up and let me know so we can make space to know who's at the table. The other thing is, as I'm sharing my screen, if you have a question or a comment or raising your hand, if somebody just wants to be vocal, because I won't be able to see that very well, that would help me out. And then with that, I can introduce myself. I'm Karen Pfeiffer. I'm the West Community Health Manager for Essentia. So I support our 5 hospital locations in our market, which include Fargo as one of those. as a person who has lived experience in poverty, I remember many times in my life of being frustrated for not being included in spaces where I thought that I would have valuable information. And as somebody who was living in spaces where I relied on systems to be able to help me and my children navigate, I also felt very frustrated at times with being told what people thought was best for me and my family when I knew what we needed, and it was not necessarily to be educated to be a better person or to understand something differently. And so I committed my career to going back to learning how to support systems change and focusing on how can we truly do better? How can we be more inclusive? And how can we really engage people? And when I first started work leading coalitions quite a few years ago, I learned the hard way, as most of us do, about what doesn't work, and really was curious about trying to figure out how can we do this and how can we do it well. And I would say we're all on the journey somewhere. You know, we have this full spectrum of where people are at. We're always in that continual growth pattern. And what I found is that results-based accountability is a best practice internationally. It is, and you'll hear more about it, but it's really an inclusive process, and it has worked very well. And it's not just about a process, it's about a framework. And so today we're going to go through that. We're going to have a lot of interactive questions kind of as we move forward. I'll be asking the group for guidance. You can use the chat bar to help pitch in as we're having these conversations. Or if you have a question, you can always, like I said, raise your hand, but speak up so I know that you're waiting for a response. And then in the middle, we'll have a short break. And then after we go through like the overall framework, and then we're going to do an interactive part. So you really can understand the language, the framework, and then you get to experience like, what is it to actually go through the process? So it's kind of a two-part thing today, which is why we have a longer session. And so I'm hoping that all of you find value. You will be asked to complete a brief poll at the very end as well, just to help me understand how beneficial this has been for you, and then how I can support you moving forward. So with that, I'm going to go to sharing my screen, and we're going to start diving in. And okay. You will get a copy of this PowerPoint and also the sheet that we're going to go through at the end, just so you know. So this will be a free guide for you moving forward. So in order to really kick us off, I wanted to share a story with you about deer hunting, because part of the culture that I grew up in is we're a deer hunting family. It's a big part of our rural Minnesota, culture in some places. And we're coming up on deer hunting season. And so I'm going to tell you a story about my neighborhood. And this is completely made up, obviously. But so I live in a neighborhood where food security is an issue. And so I decided that I was going to create a strategy around that. And since it's deer hunting season, I'm going to go harvest a bunch of deer. And that's going to help my neighborhood to be food secure. So I created a plan with all of the different things that I think are needed to be able to go harvest a deer. So I need transportation. So I have a bike. So I'm going to take my bike, and I know I need a license. So I'm going to go buy a pheasant license up at the gas station. And I need something to actually harvest the deer. So I have a BB gun, and then I think I'm going to go buy some rifle shells. So I have ammunition. So we've got the tools. And I know there's deer everywhere, so I circled about 12 different woods all over the county because there's deer all over. And I know there's lots of deer in those woods. And I know deer are active at night, so I am going to go hunting at night. And I'm going to shoot into the woods, because if there's deer everywhere and they're moving at night, I should hit some. And then I know Amazon packages things, so I think I can drop the deer off there and they're going to package it up. And then everybody knows 911 is a place that you call if you really need something, if it's an emergency. So people should be able to call there to pick up their meat. So my question to you is, how successful do you think that my plan is? And why or why not? And you can speak up, or you can if you're using the chat bar, I can't see it very well. So if you just want to share openly, that would be great.
Is your goal to get arrested?
No, I just want a bunch of deer.
Okay. Then no.
So it sounds like you think that there's like a legal concern even with my plan.
Yeah. Karen, this is Deb. Deb, my first thought was to write you and say, remind me to not go deer hunting with you. But so clearly you need to do a little more background research before you go out deer hunting and find a more approach that will help you reach your goals a little better.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I need to do more research on what would actually work, right? And it sounds like there's a safety issue. We have a legal issue. What else?
Well, if you're riding your bike, I'm saying you're 8 or 10 years old. I think it's an admirable plan. It seems a very 8 to 10-year-old-ish, so it doesn't seem very well thought out. And so I'll echo Deb's comment that there's more planning or research necessary, probably with some adults in your life.
Oh, good. Okay. So yes, I need more research, and I heard you mention the bike. So that's probably not quite the right tool or transportation mode to get me to where I need to be. Good points.
So, and I think you've got a distribution issue with assuming that Amazon is going to butcher and package raw meat, and then 911 would be the avenue for people to get the meat.
Yeah, absolutely. I probably don't have the right partners at the table, right? I'm trying to use the wrong resources the wrong way.
It's also an inefficient way to get deer, going at night and shooting into the woods randomly.
Yeah, good point. So
might need to sort out the BB gun with the rifle shell situation as well.
Right? Just because we have two tools doesn't mean that they go together, right? Even though they're both ammunition and they're both meant to harvest animal or whatever it might be. Yeah, they don't go together. So really good points. I don't have quite the right tools that I need to be successful. Shooting into the woods, great point. What kind of that's not a target, right? We're randomly shooting. Those are both issues. Anything else?
On that point, I think there's maybe more potential to cause unintended harm in this situation than things that would actually be helpful. You might shoot at somebody or not a deer, so that unintended harm would be something I would highlight.
Absolutely. Unintentional harm. I don't mean to harm other people, but with my plan, I definitely could, right?
And if you can get to 12 set of different forests within your county on your bike, that's pretty dang impressive.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. It's a little unrealistic, right?
I think this is Ahmed again. I think your heart is at the right place to solve an issue. But I think what Rory and the others said, echoing that back, to have a strategic plan to really connecting all the resources.
Yes. So yeah, even though I have a strategic plan, right? I have my transportation, I have a license, I have a weapon, I have a time, I have destination, I have resources and like partner organizations, but none of them are the right ones, right? So have you ever felt like you are the deer hunter in projects that you have tried to lead? Anybody? And not to this extreme, of course, but have you ever felt like you're setting out to achieve a goal, you have the best interest at heart with a bunch of people trying to work together, and you come up with a plan, And maybe you're in the same situation where you don't have the right tools. Maybe it's not the right resources. You don't have the people. We didn't do the research. Have you ever been there?
Oh yeah, there are lots of nodding heads here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if it's, I mean, that's how I often feel with the Moorhead Resilience Project, that I don't really know what I'm doing. And it's kind of diffuse. And so this is, yeah. Although I think there's been success because we haven't had a super clear goal, there's been other kinds of success, but yeah, that's why we need this RBA, so we can then narrow down into something.
Right. Yeah, so that is the goal of today, is to figure out how can we help this deer hunter to create a plan that would be more successful, right? Because we all are working in this world and trying to do great things, and we all have good intentions. So how do we actually create the plan to get there? So thanks for going through my story with me. So we are going to start talking about RBA. What is it? How do we do it? What does it feel like? What does it look like? And then we'll go through that actual exercise. So RBA is about building a culture of change. It's not just a process, it's a framework. It is something that you can embed into the culture of how you do your work. One of the things that I hear a lot is like, how do we make the community more inclusive? How do we recognize that individual members want to value inclusion, and not just talk about it, but actually do it and try to value and inhibit that? And what I will say is RBA is an equity-centered process. So just by using it, you are actually building equity into your planning models. It uses an anti-racist framework and principles to provide this disciplined approach on how you create systems change. And so just by using it, you are building more equity into the work that you're doing. So what actually is the process look like? We're going to talk more about this, but it's really, how do you talk about, move from like talking about something to action in a fairly quick manner based on community knowledge and data. We want things to be data driven, and data could be qualitative or quantitative, but we want things to be based on like what we know and what is true of people experiencing issues. And we're going to talk a lot more about turning the curve. And so as you can see with our cute little guys here on the screen, turning the curve is when you see a trend line happening and you can recognize that it's a problem and you want to pull it a direction. And maybe it's pulling it down because you want to lower something, or maybe it's pushing it up. But that's what we refer to as turning the curve. And it doesn't happen without people, partners, programs working together. And so we're going to continue to talk about how do we do that process then. In order to get us all on the same page, we're going to talk about some common language. So just definitions and how they relate to each other. Similar to the deer hunting story, we're going to talk about population accountability. So we had a deer hunter who was trying to address food security. That's a population issue, right? And so we talk about results and indicators on the population level. A result is what is your goal that you're trying to accomplish, or a positive outcome for a population. And then an indicator is what is the data related to the result that you're trying to achieve. And then we'll talk more about disaggregation of that as we move forward. And then on the performance level, this is the strategies that we create to address the result. And so it's what are the actual interventions that you are going to invest in to create change. And then each program or strategy should have a performance measure, which is specifically about how do we understand if our strategy is successful. And when we talk about performance measures, you're going to hear this over and over. It's not like we do talk about how much we do. This is where people tend to focus their energy. We're going to try to move from not just how much did we do, but how well did we do it, and then is anybody actually better off? And that is how collectively you can look at, are your strategies working? And if they are collectively working, and we know that we're seeing progress, together they should shift or turn the curve on that population level. I'm going to share some examples about population versus performance and result and indicator so that you kind of continue to get the feel so it doesn't feel like these foreign concepts, hopefully. So again, this result is, what is your goal? It should always be a positive statement related to a condition of well-being that you are trying to achieve for people or with people. And so, and your indicator again is, what is that overall population level data point? And so some of the examples are pretty general here, but let's say it was children born healthy in Moorhead. So your indicator then on the top there would be, what is the percent or the rate of low birth weight babies in Moorhead? That could be an indicator. Similar, safe communities in Fargo. What is the crime rate of Fargo? You can look at it for a population. You can look at it for a geography. You can look at it for many different things. You just have to clarify where it is and what it is that you're trying to do. And you want to make sure those are connected, and we'll talk about how you figure that out. And then on your performance accountability, again, this is your strategy or program. They have examples of like organizations. It's not always going to be an organization, but it can be. So like under safe communities, they might have a program through human services or through the law enforcement agency. And then you're measuring of that organization, not just how much did you do, but how well did you do it, and is anybody better off? So in the chat bar, do want to take a couple minutes and write, what are some of the results and indicators of the programs that you're engaged with? So results, indicators, or what are the goals and measures? You know, we all have different terminology, but again, we're going to talk about, try to keep consistent language. So I'm going to call it results and indicators. So if you want to take time and write, what are those? And if you don't have an indicator, that is okay. You can just write your goal. And I'm trying to figure out how I can see my chat bar at the same time that I'm doing this.
Karen, this may just be my personal issue, but I am unable to type into the chat box. It is not allowing me to type anything.
Yep, same here.
Well,
same
let's
here.
and stop sharing for a minute and fix that.
It looks like it's giving me an option for polls where the chat box usually is.
It works for me if you scroll down, because I have.
Yeah, if you scroll down below the chat box, that was an accident. I'll do that at the end, but you should be able to scroll down. I don't know why it's not working for some people. That's weird. Well, so instead of using the chat box, then why don't we just share out loud? That will work as well. So what are some of the things that you came up with?
I can share from, oh, go ahead.
I just had a clarifying question. Are you asking as it relates to Resilient Moorhead, or are you asking like with even our own work, just examples?
It could be either. I would say just in general. It could be your something you're involved with. It could be something in your personal life that you're engaged with, whatever it might be.
I was going to say, I can share from United Way's perspective. We follow a very loose version of this, I would say. We have 3 stated goals, which I did enter into the chat, which really would be examples of results that we're hoping to see community-wide. And we use indicators kind of as rationale and research-based information to support why we've set those results. They are lagging, showing disparities in our community. And then we are working towards actually creating meaningful performance measures then of our investments into the community. So when we think about, you know, hunger and homelessness, we're looking at number of folks served in different types of programs, but then also looking at how do we measure the quality of those services and how folks are doing better? Are they able to maintain housing after they've been housed from homelessness? You know, are they able to connect with SNAP, knowing that leads to less food insecurity, those types of measures? So that's some examples from us.
Perfect. Thank you.
Karen, I'll piggyback on Megan since she said homelessness, working in homelessness as we do. We actually, I'm trying to put my brain around this based on the fact that so much of what we do is set by our federal standards. And so the goal of ending homelessness, or when we say we're going to end homelessness, it means having a system where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And so, or that you get rid of that long-term homelessness piece. And so everything that we do at every stage of the system is so centered around that idea of what are the things that you need to do to make homelessness rare? What do we have to do to make it, you know, a one-time experience, and then to never, you know, and that it's brief. Sorry, I forgot brief. That brief in the middle, that, you know, we're rehousing people quickly. So that's how all of our standards. So everything we do is really focused around that. And so that's all I have to say, is that I'm trying to put my brain around how this works with that, since that's sort of imposed on us, right? Like we don't always have a choice around some of those things.
Absolutely. So it sounds like that would be your result, right? That's what you're looking to achieve. Okay. So that's your result. Absolutely.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to keep moving forward, and it'll start making more sense as we go forward, but we'll continue to ask for examples through this. So what do we do once we have a result and an indicator? Once we know what it is that our goal is, or what we're trying to achieve with people, and we have a measure, how do we figure out what we're supposed to do to make it better? So this comes down to like our deer hunter strategy. How do we design something that works? So there's what are called turn the curve principles or questions, and there's 5 of them. And these are really the core behind how you design strategies to be successful. And we're going to go through each of these because there's different parts to each one. But the first thing is to look at how are we doing? So how are we doing related to that? Again, that's your indicator. And we're going to break down into disparities and talk more about that. And then once we see what the disparity is and what the indicator is there, we're going to talk about what is the story behind the curve. So why is the measure where it's at today? What's pushing up? What's pushing down? Then we're going to talk about who has a role in turning the curve. Sometimes we go to our typical groups of who's at the table and we don't make room for more people, or we, and it's not an intentional exclusivity, but we just don't challenge ourselves sometimes to think about like who else really has a role in this, or how are we including people that are experiencing the issue. And then we're going to talk about what works to turn the curve. So how do you brainstorm with people to be inclusive of all the ideas? But then how do you break it down then and prioritize what is your actual action plan? And we're going to go through what are the key tools that you can use to do that process in a fairly quick manner. When we talk about RBA, I think one of the things that is important to keep sight of is that we don't just do it once and then it disappears from our life forever. It is a continual way of doing work. So we might start with our population level, population level result that we're trying to achieve, right? We have this, we're going to address food security, and we're going to do that. Our strategy, one of them might be about going to harvest deer. Well, then how do we, once we have done the first phase of RBA, and we have our set of like 3 to 5 strategies that we're going to do, we don't just quit there. Then we start the process over again. So then for each strategy, you go through RBA again. And that's how you design your performance measures. You come up with your action plan, which are also named strategies then at that point. And so it is a continuous way of thinking and doing that continuously, by reinforcing itself, drives you to stay accountable to what the result is that you started with. And we'll talk about how you keep that alive as part of your culture. So To your point, Cody, about like you were kind of given something of like this is what you are accountable to, so you already have a result that's been given to you, and that is the case in many organizations, and that is perfectly okay. For other organizations or other groups that are working together, you might need to develop what your result is. And so here are some key things to keep in mind when you're developing a result. You want it to be pretty simple and plain language that people understand, right? And we don't want it to be 3 sentences long. So here's what you would do is you want to complete this sentence. We want blank in a specific geographic area or population, and or I would say who are experiencing what condition. So you have your population. So who are we talking about? What is the geographic area? And what is the condition you're looking to achieve? So with that, why don't we, and it could be anything, why don't you share some, if you were to think about developing results, what are some examples that come to mind that you could put together? And they could be anything.
I'm going to take a stab here since we already have some defined results at the Hunger Coalition. We want everyone in Cass and Clay counties to be food secure.
Yes, great. You have a geographic area, you have your population, who you're talking about. You want people in that area to experience food security. Great.
I'll go next. I said we want all Moorhead residents to feel like their voice matters and become engaged in local government.
Yes. Okay, great. So you are looking for people to feel well, like their voice matters, and then also for them to act and be engaged. And yes. Great. Okay.
Try something a little bit different. We might say, we would like, people in Moorhead to be and feel connected with the natural environment of Moorhead.
Yeah. Great.
I'll take a stab. We want all 9 through 12 students in Clay County to feel like they have a caring adult in their life outside of the home.
Yes. Awesome. Great examples. So let's continue to move forward. Now let's talk about indicators. So indicators are your data point related to your result. And so when we start thinking about results, we usually what we do, like I do this in 2 different ways. If you are an expert in the field and you know the data points, you can put together a list of what potential indicators could be, and you could bring it to a group and just have them help you rank. You could brainstorm with a group of people what those indicators could be, or you can set them yourself. Like there's multiple ways to do it, but ultimately the most important thing is that you are selecting an indicator and using this process to select which one it is so that you know that you have the right indicator. And so the way that you can do that is by ranking this way, thinking about communication power. So is this something that people understand? If I was talking to the community at large, would they know what I'm talking about? So an example might be if you're talking about, let's make it around mental health, and let's talk about protective factors. All children in schools have positive protective factors. Would people know what that means at large? Probably not. And so just be thinking about whatever data point you use, that you are finding something that's relative to people that they can understand. And then proxy power, this is the most important factor. And it's just about how centrally located to the issue is it. So if I am looking at the percent of students, Rory, to your point, that have a mentor, does my data point directly relate to it, or is it kind of a side thing? So we could use examples around, like, if we're going to measure mental well-being, we probably, even though we know substance use rates are correlated, it's probably not the best measure to use. And that is a fairly stark example, but sometimes it's not as clear. And so we might have 3 different measures that are related. And so which one is the most closely related to the result you're trying to achieve? And then the last one is data power. And this is just about quality and reliability of the data. Is it available on a timely basis? You know, is it something that you can rely on year after year? So once you have your result, you would have this up at the top, then you're working with your group and you would maybe ask them, what are the potential indicators we could use? So let's pick on food security, just because I know there's a lot of them. What are potential indicators you could use for food security?
The USDA rate of food insecurity.
Yes. Food insecurity rate by USDA. What's another one?
Participation rate of SNAP enrollment.
Hmm. Yep. How many people participate in SNAP?
Percentage of free and reduced lunches in our school systems.
Yep.
Number of food pantry visits.
Okay. Yep. Anything else? So we have about 4 of them listed. So the first thing you would want to do is talk about, like, are these population level indicators, or are they program level, and make sure that you're sorting them into the right spot, because we don't want to make it. It depends on what your result is, right? And so if your result is ensuring that every person eligible for SNAP in Clay County is enrolled, then it would be really, your indicator would be around the percent of people enrolled in SNAP probably. But if your indicator is about overall food security, it might not be the best one, right? Because then we're talking about a program versus a result. And so you would want to kind of sort through, is this truly an indicator of overall food security, or is this more about a program? And so kind of sort through those things. And so you would list your indicators, and you would then go through a process with your group of saying, on a communication level, is it high, medium, or low? So high is all people would understand what this means. Low is, this is pretty confusing, I don't think people would get it. Proxy is level of importance. So how closely related is this to the actual result we're trying to achieve? And then, is it the data reliable and timely? High, medium, or low? And through that process, you'll see pretty quickly where people line up. And you may end up with 2 indicators that are all high across the board. And then what you would want to do is sort through probably just choosing one of them, because the reality is they're most likely, we talk about data running in herds, they probably are closely tied together. Because when you go through RBA, what you'll see is you really are focusing on one data point, and you understand other things run with it. But when you go through the process, it would be really difficult to do that with 2 different indicators, when the reality is you'll probably get to the same result or the same strategy. So the goal is pick one and move with it.
Karen?
Yes.
My question is around, like, the indicators and selecting them. And this is, I think, where we've had some issues in the past. Population versus program. What kind of group size do you need to agree on these indicators? And how much is given to the group versus how much is a collective or consensus kind of driven, like we all agree, versus no, that's not right? Because I think that's where too we've had some issues of saying, this is what we want to measure, and then programs are coming back and say, yeah, I can't, I won't, it doesn't matter. And so I'm just curious, from your expertise, who should be involved in selecting those indicators, and at what level do you have them selected?
Yeah, that is a great point. So if you're talking about an overall population, what I would say is it's not about the number of people that are in the group, it's who are the experts that would really be able to weigh in on what those should be. Like, who knows what that data should or could look like. And those are probably the people that could help you identify what it should be. And then as far as you're talking about programs, so that moves more into the performance measure. Those might be very different. And we're going to talk about this more, but part of the issue that we always have is people in general have relied on how much do we do instead of how well do we do things. And so we'll talk more about that because we're talking about motivation for change then. And that's a whole nother part of the conversation. But I would say for your indicator, who are the experts that know the data that can help you sort through what you should be looking at? So is that helpful?
Karen, one other thing, if you, sometimes, there's a problem obviously with you choose a data point and then things get organized around that and it can lead to perverse incentives, And so how do we avoid that everything then gets organized around one data point and you may miss other things?
Yeah, that is also a great question. And as we go through this, I think it'll make more sense. But I think the thing that we always try to stick on is you have to start somewhere. So there will always be some organization or some group that might have more involvement than another one, just because we have to start somewhere. And when you do this and you do it well, if you're really have it structured where it's inclusive, where you are making sure that everybody is at the table for the decision making, people will co-create and own the strategies that come out of it. So it removes the bias naturally just through the process. And then also whatever strategies you are implementing, if they help a specific population of people, because part of the design of how we do this work, it will also help other people. So we can't do everything, but when we're very specific and strategic about where we're starting and being intentional with that, it will help other people naturally by design. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sounds like it's in the strategies, and if it's a small community level, because there's all kinds of examples where you try to achieve one data goal with one data point, and then you do things in ways that have unintended, bad consequences. But I think you already mentioned that, and it sounds like in the strategies part, that's where it gets worked out. So that's helpful.
Yeah. As we go through, we'll talk more about that, and you'll kind of see where can we address those things because they're great points. So to that point, one of the things that's important is once you have an indicator, again, this goes into like the deer hunting story of shooting into the woods randomly, right? We cannot possibly fix everything. So if we're saying we're going to fix every student in the entire county's well-being, you're thinking about it in a way that's going to set you up for failure, because we just don't have the resources to do all of that. Because in order to really make impact and do it well, we need to figure out how can we really hone in to a specific area where we understand that there's a disparity and do it well so that it can be replicated and that we can build off of those lessons learned. And when people see success there, they will want to copy and follow along. They'll be like, how did you do that? Let me learn from you, right? And so we really need to think about when we have an indicator, we need to understand where the disparity is so that we can know where we need to focus our efforts. Again, it kind of goes back into, have you ever been part of, and I heard some of this, like being part of a work group where you're doing a lot of really nice things, but you don't ever see the marker change, right? We're not turning the curve. but we can pat ourselves on the back because we all feel good because I'm showing up every day. And this process is really more about how can you really intentionally turn the curve. So it's not about doing the nice things that make us feel good, that, you know, maybe make somebody's day for a week or two. It's about this long, sustainable change that happens. And it takes a long time, but it does actually turn the curve. And so in order to do that, we need to understand where the disparity lies. And in here, you can see I have an example of, I led coalition work in Becker County. We looked at the percent of students experiencing depression and hopelessness because youth mental well-being was a top priority. We want all youth to be experience positive well-being. The indicator we chose was the percent of 8th graders experiencing depression and hopelessness. And then we broke down by school district and said, well, what do we understand about this issue by school district? And then we were able to see that Frazee had the highest rate of depression and hopelessness. And that allowed us to say, let's go to Frazee and let's hone in and focus our work there. Now, to your point, Ken, you know, do other school districts maybe feel like they're missing out or something? Maybe they do. And it's not that we're not, we don't care about them, but we cannot possibly create impact in every single place at the same time because we don't have the resources. So how can we do it well here and then take that and learn from it and then go to other places in the future? So as we do this, you identify your indicator, you figure out what are the disparities that live within it, and you chart those out so people can see it. So you want to create that trend line because we need visual ways of looking at things as well, right? So once you have a trend line and an indicator, this is where you're going to want to say, who is actually experiencing the issue? So if we're talking about 8th graders experiencing depression and hopelessness, who do you think is going to know the most about why that's happening?
8th graders.
Yeah, the 8th graders who are experiencing it, right? Or if we're talking about residents of Moorhead feeling engaged, who is going to be able to tell us about why that is or why that isn't?
More residents.
Yeah, right. It's probably not going to be leaders of Fargo, right? Or if I want to understand why people are food insecure or why they aren't, who would be able to tell us about why they feel that's happening?
People experiencing food insecurity.
Yes. So when you have your disparity mapped out and your indicator and you know where you need to hone in, you've already figured that out. You're like, hey, we understand, like there's a neighborhood in Moorhead that we have a high rate of food insecurity there maybe. We feel like we need to go engage those people in this conversation, and this is what you would bring to them. This is where you would engage with them, is you would show them your data trend, right? And you'd be able to have a conversation with them and you would say, what is pushing up on the curve? So why is this happening? And you would spend about 15 minutes talking about what's pushing it up. And then they would also talk about what is pushing it down. So this is kind of your asset mapping part of, depending on what the data is. But if you're trying to push it down, you would talk about what's pushing it down currently. So that's your assets of like, what are the current programs? What do you people already have access to? Who's working on the issue? What are all those things? And they go through a very active brainstorming process together about understanding the truth of like, why is this happening? And then what is working to change it? And so the people experiencing it are really engaged in that process. So they're telling you what it is that they know about it. And then once we have a list, because they're gonna, when they're done with this part, they're gonna have a list of about 25 to 30 things, right? And so then what you're gonna look at with them is to say, okay, if we were to rank all of the things that they came up with, about what are the most influential what would those be? And you rank them from, you can use a scale of 1 to 5, you know, you can use other ranking methods if you feel better about those, but really what you're going to want to do is figure out what are the top 3 to 5 factors that are the most influential out of all the things. Because this part is really about root cause, right? We don't want to do Band-Aid things anymore because we know that they don't work. We know that they don't change the curve long term. So this is really helping people identify what are those root causes. When you really think about what is causing the most critical issue, what are they? And so it's going to help them hone down on where do we need to focus our energy if we're truly going to create change around this issue. And then this is where, once you come up with those factors, it gives you an opportunity to, again, to say, do we have the right people at the table? Because let's say you're talking about food insecurity and they end up going through this whole process and say, well, really the issue is that we don't have jobs that are paying well enough. So now all of a sudden you're talking about workforce issues. And so then it gives you an opportunity to say, well, if we're going to talk about that and that's going to be part of the strategy that we work on, who else needs to be involved? Who should be there? Who should we be talking to about it? And so you have the opportunity to engage and list out who can be included. So once you have those, your top influencing factors lined out, and you have gone through like who needs to be at the table, this is where you have the opportunity to bring them together around that factor. And you can review, here's the result that we started with. Here's the indicator. Here's how we broke down the disparity. Here's how we identified who was at the table. When we did story behind the curve with people experiencing the issue, this is what they told us, and this is what they prioritized. So now we want to brainstorm together with you included about how do I address this factor, right? And then we're going to prioritize and implement a strategic plan. So once you have them at the table and you kind of set the stage, this is where people get to brainstorm together. So this includes people experiencing the issue along with other partners that need to be involved that have again, might be able to address some of those issues that we talked about. So we've included these additional people, we're going to pull them in and we're going to brainstorm together. And based on those factors, those 4 factors or 3 to 5 that they've identified, we're going to say, now what ideas do you have that would fix those or address them? So they spend about 35 minutes talking about like, what are some of the best practices? What do we know that works in other places? What is something that is totally outside of the box that we think would work really well or would be really cool? What are some low and no cost solutions, things that we can do pretty quickly and easily? And then are there things that might be promising, but we need more data to be able to understand it? So I'll give you an example of yesterday I was on a call and Ahmed had suggested, because we were kind of going through part of our strategic planning, and Ahmed suggested, well, I think it would be really helpful to know how people are currently working with each other so that as we kind of expand this work that we can know that we have the right people at the table, and then also how well they're working together, right? So again, how well are we doing things? So we created a data development point. Look at that, Ahmed, you were a part of this and you didn't even know it probably. So as you go through this, your group comes up with all these ideas that address those top factors that you've identified, those root causes. And then you go through a ranking because now you have a set of 35 strategies and everybody probably feels overwhelmed about how are we possibly going to do all these things. So the good news is you don't have to do all the things. You can't do all the things because again, we have limited resources. So this is where your group would go together and rank strategies. And you can do this fairly quickly. It doesn't take as long as you would think. And so there are 4 different categories on how we rank all the strategies. So you might make a list of the 35 strategies. And what we would do is we would go through this together, and you would say, which ones would have the greatest impact? So thinking about those 4 factors or 5 factors we pulled out, which of these strategies would have the most impact on our community? What are the most important ones to consider when we think about what would actually turn the curve? Which ones are feasible? Again, we have limited resources. We may be able to allocate resources, and that's okay, but like, what can we do with the capacity that we have? And the other important thing to consider is the political climate. Do we have desire for change? Because we could have the biggest issue in the world, but if nobody wants to talk about it and nobody is at the table to make change, we're probably not going to be successful. So this is thinking about resources as well as capacity for change. And maybe if there's not capacity, that gives you an opportunity to say, well, the first thing we need to do is figure out a plan then on how we can build capacity, right? So it might add something that you need to do in your steps. The third one is about, is it clear? Do we understand what this strategy even means? Would people be able to know if they saw it? Do you understand what that means? And then lastly, and this one is really important, especially as we think about, like, I often think about politics in this way. Do the people on the receiving end of the service value what you're saying as a solution as much as the people making the decisions? So, for example, and this is it's an extreme example, but let's say we're going to make legislative changes to the WIC program. And I feel that we need to hold more people accountable. And so starting tomorrow, we are going to ask every person to bring their W-2 form or their current pay stub with them every time they come to the WIC clinic. How value aligned do you think that would be? Probably not, right? People on the receiving end of that service are going to be very upset. And so that just helps us understand, like, we might value this, but does everybody value it? And do people receiving the service or that are going to be served, are they valuing it at the same level that I am? And so we would do this process together. We would go through and rank each idea on impact, feasibility, clear, and value aligned. So you make a list of your strategies on the left. You have high, medium, and low for each area. And you go through and kind of quickly have this group conversation about where it is. And sometimes people won't always agree, and that's okay. But that's where you make like a little note or something about where people don't agree. And we don't get stuck on it. You kind of, if you have to pass one over, that's okay. You go through pretty quickly. You're going to see really fast where people align. And you look for the ones that are high across the board. And then also, again, impact is the most important. And then you're also going to want to select 1 or 2 low, no-cost solutions, because that gives people momentum for change and quick energy. So you select 1 to 2 low, no-cost solutions, and then you add anywhere from 3 to 4 other strategies. If you get more than 5 strategies, you are also going to set yourself up for failure, because it becomes such a big plan that it's really hard to get it accomplished. So the suggestion is that you stick with 3 to 5, you keep this list. Once you accomplish some of them, then you can go back and add things, but don't start off so big that you can't feel like you accomplish it. And then once you have selected those top 3 to 5 things, this is where you're going to go back and you're going to start your RBA phase 2, because each strategy should have a performance measure. And again, we talked about this a little bit, but historically, we've always looked at, like, how much did we do? I reached out to 35 people, or I met with 37 organizations, or I delivered 87 resources of something to people, right? That's where we look at how much effort are we doing. What we have failed to do historically is look at what is the actual effect and how are people better off. You see a couple examples on the bottom about like percentage of people or number of people that are successful at achieving something. So how are we really looking at the effect and the quality of the work that we're doing? So how well did we do it? And how do we know that people are better off? And when we're designing our strategies, though, that's where we're asking people to focus their energy, is on those areas. So again, then you go to phase 2. Now you have your strategies, your 3 to 5, you have your performance measures. Now what do we do? Now you look at your strategy and you say, okay, one of our strategies around food security is going to be around workforce development. Let's say it's that, right? Because they identified that they need better jobs. So where and who should be on a committee that we pull together to really work on that issue? How can we create a space for that? And then they would use RBA in that subcommittee to be able to design a plan to achieve success. So they would go through the same process, starting with the strategy as the result, and then the performance measure as the indicator, and then looking at what do we know about our data trend, going through the story behind the curve with people that are experiencing the issue, going through the prioritization process, and making sure that we are focusing on the right activities so that we know we can be successful. So again, it's not a you do it once and it ends. We continue to use this as a culture of doing, because that is how we stay accountable to knowing that we're creating the greatest impact, that we're considering feasibility, that we're thinking about who needs to be at the table always, and that we're being inclusive, and that we are also value aligned with what is important for all people. So now you have this great big plan you have put together, it's beautiful, and you're really excited about it. And we give you one more opportunity to examine before you go ahead and launch everything. And I understand like this doesn't happen in a silo, so sometimes it's not that simple, but what I would suggest is that before you launch your plans, that you take this opportunity to go over your plan with the group that has created it and talk about potential harm and how you're going to address those. And when I say potential harm, it could be, that could include minimizations. How have we historically minimized people or considerations? And what do we need to do within our strategy to make sure that we're addressing those and that we're validating that those are real? So it gives you that one last glance to make sure that you are doing no harm first and that you are being intentional about how to be address those issues. And you can outline what you need to adapt in your strategy to make sure that you're addressing those things. And then how do you continue? So once you went through this process, you have this big, beautiful plan, you have a strategy. How do you continue to make sure that that culture lives within your coalition or your work group or whatever it is? You make it your agenda. So every time you meet as a group, you're saying, here was the result we wanted, here was the indicator, this is who's at the table, right? Here's what we went through for turn the curve, and it can be a summary. Here's the top factors, here's the strategies, here's what our performance measures are and our actions, and what are we doing, what do people have to report out on, and then what are our next steps, or how do we continue to move it forward? So whenever you meet, you're actually actively working together to be proactive about talking about what's needed to continue to inform your plan, to get through those sticky points, and in order to really be successful. And then people can see all the time, where are we at? What have we even accomplished? Do you ever show up for meetings and you feel like, I don't even know what we're doing anymore? Like, what have we done? Have we done anything? This gives you the opportunity to constantly be looking at what is the data, what do we know? And you also can say, has anything changed? Like, is there some new breakthrough thing that happened, or is there a new population of people in town that we need to be inclusive of, or where should we use people to inform our plan? So it lives on in the way that you continue to set up your agendas, and then your agendas for your committees would be focused around what your strategies are, and you would do the same thing. So with that, that was a whole lot of information. We're going to go ahead and go through a short exercise, but I want to give you a 5-minute break before we do that, so that you can go do what you need to do and then come back in 5 minutes, and we're going to go through this quick exercise to just give you a taste of like what could it look like. So we will see you at 9:47-ish.
Hey, Karen. This is Tom.
Yes, sir.
Curious, maybe we can talk about this too, and I apologize if others are kind of tuning back in, but one of the things when we talk about like, is anyone better off, and we look at like population level outcomes, specifically around like homelessness, is how do you either get a starting point of your data, because like there's such an influx of people coming in and the community is constantly changing, its dynamic. The same thing happens with food insecurity, jobs, whatever, even third grade. So like, how do you actually try and figure out like from what we've done, even if you have all the correct indicators, you have the right partners at the table, you have the right interventions and strategies, then to say, is anyone better off? Because these things like homelessness, they're really stubborn indicators to try and make movement on. So I think this is where too we get very like almost dejected, you know, and like we look at this for some of our shared performance measures in homelessness and say, wow, we helped 1,000 people get housing, and then we do the state of homelessness report and it's like, neat, homelessness ticked up by 47 people.
Yeah.
And so then it's almost like, you know, and again, I'm not trying to be a defeatist. It's just to the general community, it doesn't map on like that. There's that perception has not changed, or even with, again, food insecurity, it's like, why is SNAP enrollments up? You know, whatever it is. And so I'm just curious if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. So that sounds like a great opportunity when you're seeing that happen, to go back and look at the data and do the story behind the curve again and say, why do you think that happened? Why is it going up? So it could be a few things. It could be demographic changes. Maybe the community is increasing by such and such percent, and so we just have more people, right? Maybe it is that when we went through our strategic planning, we didn't really get to the root causes. Maybe we addressed some things, but we didn't get to the true root cause. And if you don't get down to those root causes, you're probably not going to see a lot of shift. And so, and those are hard. Like I am not going to minimize it. It's really hard to do. Maybe it's because there are political things that play or legislative policies that prohibit us from being able to do what we need to do. Maybe, you know, there could be a number of things, but what I would encourage you to do is, if you're seeing that, do story behind the curve to really understand why it's happening. Because until you can get to like the root causes, or, you know, we're not going to see those change. Or what it'll do is it'll develop talking points so that when you go talk to city officials or legislators or funders, you're able to say, we know that we're working to address this. We recognize that there's been an increase, and we have engaged with people, and this is why that's happening. And so then you have your talking points about how you can educate people on the issue, and then what do you need to do as your next step to address it. So that's where I would say it kind of lives as a culture of doing, is because you can always look at something and be like, well, why is that happening? And asking those 7 whys, right? Why?
Well, Karen, I just want to say that I think that that's helpful. And Tom, the way like Tom's phrase of saying defeatist is like really, because when you start looking at those root causes, and I was thinking about this all morning as you were talking, and every time like looking at those root causes, like the academic research on homelessness says like the lack of a social safety net keeping up, the housing market, like all of these things that are so massive and in some ways national, right? Like you know, and trying to come up with local solutions is sort of overwhelming. So I'm still feeling a little overwhelmed and maybe slightly defeatist, Tom, but that's helpful to say, like, even just to figuring out what's within your control, and maybe then like what can you do within that piece. I've oftentimes said to folks, and we do problem solving, to just say, oh, you know what? We can't fix the national housing market, but what can we do locally? Or what can we do, even if we can't fix the local market, what can we do to just circumvent that, right? So creative. So this is helpful. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And there's a couple things.
We need to identify who it is we want to actually affect, because when we say all people, it's too nebulous. And I even think about, and I'm guilty of this too, of saying everyone. And so we have to be honest about what we're actually trying to do. And I even think about that in some of the examples of like, well, which students at Concordia, you know, is it all students, or do we have to really try and identify which students or which 8th graders? And I think your example of like Frazee versus Lake Park or DL, we have to be able to answer that authentically without, you know, saying, well, we don't care about these students over here. We only care about these students, but we have to be able to frame that as a group to say, this is why these students, or, you know, Native American students who are not reading proficiently at 3rd grade, why? You know, and so it can't be all kids all the time, because we can't do that. There's just too much to do.
Right. Yeah. To that point, I'd agree with you 100%, because what happens when we say all kids is then we focus on the majority, which tends to be the majority of people are not the good news is the majority of people aren't struggling, right? And so if we're designing strategies for all people, we're focusing on the majority, and the reality is that that's not who we need to focus on. And so we really need to be intentional about thinking where we need to focus and who we can support. So Yes, I see other people with hands raised and questions, so let's.
Yeah. If I could jump in, I have a related question that I've been thinking about, and thank you for the wonderful presentation so far. I feel like getting the people most affected by the issue to the table is where I see the most potential for this to go awry. And I see a lot of groups think that they did that step, but in the reality, it's a lot of people like us at the table who are probably on the clock and maybe working passionately on the issue, but not really the most affected. And, you know, it's hard. It's not because we don't think about this and want to do this, but it's really hard to do it in a way that isn't superficial or transactional, kind of at best.
Right.
There's a lot of power issues. And, you know, sometimes at the university, we'll say, oh, you just need to pay people, you know, give them a $20 gift card and they'll come to the focus group. But I don't think that leads to us getting the most authentic and meaningful engagement or like the ongoing relationships that are needed to really address these issues. So any thoughts that you have on that or that others have, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So I would say there's two things I want to say is number one, you have to start somewhere and don't throw out your entire project because you can't engage with everybody, and use it as a challenge to be like, as you're going through story behind the curve, be honest about just saying, I feel like we really need better engagement from this community because in order to do this well, I need to understand more. And then that becomes your, you know, then you can talk about as a group that could turn into a strategy of its own. That might be your first step to say, how do we do this? And maybe your whole first year is about building relationships then. How can we build authentic relationships? How can we be intentional, not just one time, but on an ongoing manner to really build that engagement so that we can do this work well? So it becomes part of the plan that you talk about. But I think it goes to, you have to be able to talk about it in your group, and you have to, as you're going through the process, it's part of the story that you're telling. But don't not do something because you can't start with the whole picture. You have to start somewhere. So start with what you have and figure out how to build on it as part of your story.
If I can jump in, because actually that tags in really well with what I was going to say, because I think so we're in the process through the Resilience Project of doing some initial community discussions that'll help us reach, you know, in terms of the goal that I talked about of, you know, of working at making people feel more engaged and feeling like they have a voice. And in particular, looking at our underrepresented communities. And one of the things that we did is we recognized that if there are barriers for people to become engaged, sometimes we're the barriers, like, or we're either we're the barriers or we're blind to those barriers. And so it was important to not have us be the ones that were there when we were asking people to come to the table. And so like we hired a consultant, Leticia Mazzaro-Hellerud, who does this in the community. She's leading these focus groups. And then with each focus group, we have somebody who's a trusted member of that community who is helping to bring people in. So it really isn't, you know, we're trying to distance ourselves so that people feel comfortable being honest. Like if they don't trust government, if we're there, they're not going to be able to say that. So, you know, things like that, changing your methodology a little bit. So,
yeah, absolutely. Really good questions and points.
One other comment I'd like to make, just because I know I've been in a number of conversations, and when we talk about diversity, I think that we all need to just get more comfortable in naming the specific communities or aspects of diversity that we think are underrepresented. Because oftentimes we hear things like, we want to target Black families, and then we do a really good job of targeting Black new American families. Well, is that our actual target? Or are we missing part of the community that we're trying to serve? So I think that we just need to be more comfortable in naming, is it specifically race? Is it immigration, nationality status? Is it gender identity? Whatever it may be, but more comfortable in explicitly naming that. so that we can stay focused?
So one of the things, I actually just had this conversation because at Essentia we have some priorities and we use a lot of data around Black and African American people and health disparities, and we are specifically focused with New American community when you look at our strategies. And I had somebody ask, can you explain that? Like, can you explain why that is that you're using these data metrics? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And it goes down to when you look at the indicator, and we have this indicator around Black and African American people and health disparities, right? And then we broke it down further because you have to think about, and we're going to go through this in our next session, but you have to think about where motivation for change is as well. And you have to really hone in, can we really change health disparities for all Black and African American people in Cass and Clay counties? That's a big order. Can we even change it for all New Americans? That's also a tall order. And there's a lot, and like I said, in the next session, we'll go through this, but when we were ranking where are organizations and motivation for change really present, it's in the New American community. We have people working together. We have organizations willing to invest. There's a lot of motivation at the political level. And so it made sense to really hone in that direction. So I agree, it's an important point. And when we talk about prioritizing our work, we're going to get into more of how do you do that? How do you justify, like, what are your talking points, and how can you do it in an unbiased way that removes any, like, I'm doing this because I feel like we should do this tomorrow. It's more about doing an assessment of need and asset-based and really moving on strengths in your community. Does that kind of help, Megan? Yeah.
I have just a super short clarifying question about this refinement of scope. As you dig into the data and the disparity and sort of refine that based on this prioritization process, is that modifying your original result, or are your strategies just more refined based on the data you've uncovered? I'm kind of grappling with that. Yeah. So is the result then changed, or does the result stay the same and the strategies are just hyper focused?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it could be either or. You might hone down and say, well, after what we found, we really need to adjust our result because we know now that we're not going to be able to do this, but maybe we can hone in here. Or you can keep the same result and say, this is our starting point and we're going to start with these strategies. But once we accomplish ABC, we're going to jump into other ones that continue to serve this larger goal. So I think it depends on what project you're talking about. But you should be looking to make sure that things are reflecting each other and that you have your talking points and clarity around whatever that is. Okay, now we're going to move into an exercise. We only have half an hour, so we're going to go pretty quickly through this because I do want to leave a little bit of time at the end. This is a really basic worksheet, and we're going to fill it out together. And because I heard so much about engagement of people, I think this is a really great thing to start with because I think it's something all of us struggle with, including myself sometimes, like where it's a hard thing to feed, right? So let's say all people in Greenland feel engaged in making community decisions. Is that a fair result? What would an indicator be? Any ideas?
Registered voters.
So registered voters.
I was actually going to say voter participation.
Yep. Perfect. And I put are engaged because it's about like, what is the result? And so we want them to be engaged. That's the result we're seeking, right? So we have % of registered voters Are there any other indicators that come to mind?
I'm not sure if this is a more of a program-based indicator, but maybe participation in community meetings.
Yeah. And I would say, even if it's not, like, even if you think it might be a program one, it's helpful to throw them out, because then when you get to strategies, you're going to be like, oh, remember these data points we had? Let's pull them back and see what's relevant. Absolutely. So it could be a program.
Oh, sorry, maybe like policies adopted or changed that are community driven.
Ah, okay. So percent of community grassroots policy change.
What about something like percentage who self-report that they feel highly engaged? I'm just thinking about something like you do a survey.
Yeah, great.
Could you look at the equitable distribution of elected officials? So like based on demographics of Greenland, you know, to say that there should be parity in elected office to ensure that all voices are represented. I don't know if that's accurate, but.
Absolutely. Great. So we have a lot of ideas here. Now, if we were to go through and rank them on, would be our next step, is looking at the data points and then proxy communication and data. So we're going to do this really quickly. Again, the proxy is the most important, because this is about importance, or relativity, I would say. Relativity, that might help. Data is it reliable and timely? And sometimes we don't have a data point, and so we need to go find one. So that becomes our first step, just as a reminder. So looking at these, I'm not going to go through every one in full because we don't have a lot of time here, but what one would you say is the most relative to the result that we're seeking? If we say that people in Greenland are engaged in community decisions, which one or two do you feel is the most relative?
I think maybe the self-reporting piece.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Great.
I also feel like the voter participation, if you have high turnout at an election, right, that would show engagement at the fundamental level.
Absolutely. It could be. Yep.
Or even just the juxtaposition between those who are registered and those who actually participate.
Absolutely. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead, and here's the thing is, like, if you start somewhere, like both of these are good, you can't make it will lead you down a slightly different path. So here's what I'm going to say is that from my purview, I'm going to say that voter participation is a program because it's specifically related to a voting activity. Like, voting is an activity that people participate in. So that could be a program one. The percent of residents self-reporting that they feel highly engaged has the same language as our result. So it's probably a better indicator. And we can still use the registered voters, people participating in meetings, looking at the policy changes. These might become program performance metrics. Does that make sense? So I think heads are nodding. Okay, so then if we are going to do this, who should be at the table? Obviously, we're talking about like people from the community, right? You would probably want to go through and identify who has not historically been involved, and to ensure engagement and representation. Okay, now that we know, we're going to talk about the percent of residents self-reporting that they feel highly engaged. We need to figure out where is our disparity. So does somebody want to name, like we can pick anything. What do you feel a disparity area would be in this that we can identify?
I think there's definitely racial, ethnic differences. I'd say income level differences in terms of participation.
So should we just pick a group and as we can't address everything, so again, we need to figure out where is the greatest area. So let's pick a group to be at 32% feel engaged. What do you feel we should pick on?
Those in poverty.
All right. So now we know that this is our lowest data point, right? So this is where we're going to start because it has the greatest disparity. So again, this is where you would say who needs to be at the table that has experienced. Oh, I don't know why it's doing that, but who needs to be at the table? And it's how do we engage with people that are experiencing poverty then, or experiencing low income? So we would go through story behind the data, like the story behind the curve. So what is increasing? So let's go. Okay, so you are going to pretend that you are somebody in poverty. Why do you feel that, and for this, we know that a higher trend line, we want this curve to go up, right? We want more people to feel engaged. So why don't we talk about what is pushing the curve down? Because that's usually easier for people to talk about first, is what is the problem? So you are somebody from Greenland who is low poverty or in poverty, experiencing poverty, and we want to hear from you. Why do you feel you are unengaged? What is the problem?
Maybe because I make a lower wage, I have to spend more time working, and so I don't have time available.
If you have kids
I have-
and you can't afford childcare to, somebody to babysit your kids so that you can go to a meeting and they won't let you bring your kids to it, then that's a barrier.
I have kids and childcare, but I don't have transportation or my Wi-Fi is not working, so I can't join the virtual meeting.
Yes.
My opinions haven't been listened to in the past.
Nobody like me is in a leadership position, and so I don't relate to them.
What else?
Sort of related to those, but I don't necessarily trust the people leading the meeting or program.
Okay. Say more about that. Why don't you trust them? Do you know?
Not of the same background, haven't been in my shoes before, don't really know what I'm going through or my struggles.
What else? How about nobody asked me? Okay, we're going to keep moving just because we don't have a lot of time here. What are all the things that your community is doing or that you know that's going on that is trying to push it up? So what are currently efforts or who's working on things that are trying to push it up to make people feel more engaged?
Provide free transportation to all city meetings via the bus.
Great.
Hosting meetings at reasonable times, not during the workday. And not during dinner time.
So just to clarify, these are things that are already happening, right? Perfect. Okay. What else?
Having informal meetings, so it's not where you have to use parliamentary procedure and stand up at a microphone and be recorded and all of those things that can be very intimidating.
Let's say there's flyers in the community so people know.
I think along with what Deb said, and maybe you don't have to write this down, but I think implied in that is that the expectations are easy to understand, right? As to if you're going to come, if you're going to speak up, participate, that the expectations of how to do that are clear.
Great. Okay. Again, we're going to keep moving. So thinking about which of these factors are the most influential. Let's just pick up to the 4 of them. What do you think are the issues or the factors that make the biggest difference for people?
I would say that welcoming piece, not being asked to join or feel like I'm specifically being asked to join.
Yes. Yeah, I don't want to just see a flyer. I want somebody to ask me, right? Yep. What else?
Trust and leadership.
And when we talked about trust, we talked about representation / experience.
I think there's a piece too of like receiving input well and being accountable to share how that feedback actually played into making the decision.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, transparency or accountability or something like that.
Great one. Okay, I'm adding that as one of those. Okay, so we have trust related to it. Let's just put here, we're going to put representation. And then you also added this up here. So when people think about what are 2 more factors that are the most influential, what would they be?
I think time commitment underscores like several of these different things, like that would influence childcare access, transportation, all those different things.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's just go with the 3 that we have. That is totally okay. So if we're going to look at these 3, we're going to create strategies around these 3. Who else needs to be at the table? Who are people that would be important to be included in addressing these? I'm going to put time commitment / resources. Are there certain organizations or?
I would say community leaders that are multilingual, or somebody who can reach out in a known form or known way that's trusted.
I would say grassroots leaders focused on poverty.
Probably the current elected officials.
Trying to think of like, much like what Tom said about multilingual, but like leaders who look like me, right? If I'm not a white person, if I'm not like that, or if I'm LGBT, etc. to see. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe service providers that can help decrease barriers, like people who work in transportation or could provide childcare at events or things like that.
We've got a list here. So now we're going to go to brainstorming. So we know that the 3 issues we're addressing are I'm going to write them on the left here, are being asked, representation, and then addressing time resources. So being asked, representation, and resources, time. So now we're going to brainstorm solutions together with this wider group around these areas. What are some of the solutions that you have? And it can be any of these boxes as far as low, no cost, evidence-based, outside the box. What ideas do you have to address these areas?
In terms of a low or no cost thing, could be a social media outreach or social media campaign.
Programs designed to help underrepresented community members run for elected positions.
And I'm going to go along with that. Another one is having a policy at the government level requiring representation, right? Enforce each other. What
So
else?
maybe like some kind of an ambassador program where it's not elected, but you develop volunteers from all different areas that reach out into their communities, and that would cover that being asked part and representation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else?
Maybe an out of the box idea or harder to implement would be holding community meetings at different locations rather than at just City Hall, but having a formal meeting in a location where transportation wouldn't be a barrier.
Yeah.
I have a really out of the box one. Greenland could offer all low-income families a community engagement tax credit or financial support.
Absolutely. What else?
Policies protecting voter rights and making registration easier.
Perfect. So as we're going through these, I see a lot of different things. And here's where you can kind of double check yourself as well. Your solutions should include policy. They should also include any environmental issues or challenges and system change. And so if your solutions that your group comes up with does not include those various different things, you're probably missing the mark somewhere. So that gives you the opportunity to stop and say, are we really on the right track? So when I look at this, we kind of have all of those things. We're talking about program changes, which is a system change. We're looking at different policies that would help improve. We're talking about programs. We're also talking about like environmental issues of like meeting at different locations, you know, and so being more mobile. So I feel like we're on the right track here, right? So once we go over all these different ideas, our next step would be to prioritize them. Instead of writing them all down here, we're just going to kind of go up here and I'm just going to highlight. So if we were to pick, we only have one low, no cost idea. So we're just going to automatically highlight that one. because we want to get a quick win and like get people motivated and be able to start acting pretty quickly, right? If we were to think about which one, again, we have impact, feasibility, value alignment, and specificity. Impact is the most important. If you think about which one would be the most impactful, what do you feel that it would be?
I really feel like requiring equal representation is just hugely important in getting people engaged.
All right. I think that would be high impact. It, depending on the unit you're working with, it might not be value aligned, because I feel like people from the community might value align with it, but potentially the government agency or whoever we're working with might not. So that would be something worth evaluating with your group. And just because it's not value aligned doesn't mean that you can't have it as a strategy. It just means that where you start, you might need to think about where you need to start from. So you might have some first steps of thinking about how you can build capacity for that change. What else? What else would be really impactful?
Well, I'm still thinking about the equal representation, and maybe it's not representation in elected office, but restructuring decisions about, I don't know, community budgets, so that we are requiring more representation of residents and community members in those decision-making systems.
Or Noel, I was also thinking too, like in requiring proper representation in staffing, right? And those kinds of things, so that so that there are leaders in training, that there's, you know, all of those pieces that sort of like rise up to the top eventually.
Right. So I'm adding all of those into one. These probably could be separate as well, but we're going to have them as one priority for this, just for today. So as an example, we're going to come down and we're going to jump through. So this is where you would go to RBA phase 2. You would have your strategy around social media, and then you would want to identify what is your performance measure. So not just how much, but how well did we do something, and is anyone better off? So this, because it's a low, no cost solution, you know, it's a little bit harder to do the is anybody better off for this, but we probably could look at like how well did we do something by looking, you know, using analytics from social media. For the strategy related to representation, what do you feel our performance measure would be? It would probably be, like, if I had to take a stab at it, it would be that the percent of people representing the population on government, staff, and committees are equal to what the population is as a whole, right? So we would look at percentage of representation.
And Karen, just to make sure I'm clear about this, the performance measure here is equivalent to the indicator in the earlier part. So that's why we're looking for percentage or data points, right?
Right. Yep. Yep. Because we should always be thinking about, like, your performance measure should be, is anybody better off? And so what we're looking to do is create this real shift. And then this becomes your indicator when you move to the next RBA phase. So your percent actually matches your population. Yep. So then this is where you would go into your RBA phase 2, and you could do your brainstorming and looking at who else needs to be at the table to do the equal representation. what strategies or actions do we need to put into place to address this? And so that helps you design what your action plan will look like. So then you would list your actions here. And you would have a number of them. Maybe we need to start by like creating the ambassador team to work on this plan, right? We need to create a team. What else would we need to do for actions to move this forward? We need a baseline, so we need to know what it currently is.
Well, at some level too, you're going to have to advertise that these positions are open or that this is an opportunity. And I'm just thinking of like, how do you actually push that out to say, did you know you can run for city council? The elections are coming up in June.
Mm-hmm.
Would evaluating hiring practices be a part of that for the staff piece?
Absolutely. And this is where, like, when you're going through your RBA phase 2, all of these would come up as part of your strategies that you're like trying, like, what is best practice? What is low, easy things like advertising positions? What are some of the outside the box ideas? So you would come up with all of your ideas and then again go through that prioritization process to say, okay, now what are we going to do to move this forward? What makes sense based on that? So then once you have those, you would put them here and you would say, here's the actions we're going to do. Now, who's responsible for each one? What's our timeline? What do we need to make this happen? Do we need additional resources? And then continue like making notes as you move through and talking about next steps. So that is, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to share this poll if I can figure this out here quickly. I know that's a lot of information. We had to move through it pretty quickly. So we're going to do the poll. And then also, I'd be curious if you want to write in the chat bar what you need to continue to move forward with RBA. Like, what do you feel would be helpful to be able to support you and your organization moving forward? And then if you have questions, I can definitely answer those at this time as well. Okay. Do the polls show up for you guys? Perfect. Okay. Practice. Yep. I have done trainings with staff and with our community health team across Essentia, and I think we have done, we did like an overall training, and then we took turns practicing leading RBA, just randomly picking different things and moving through it just so we could get used to the process, because it does take practice, just with as with anything. Examples of completed worksheets? Yes, absolutely. So Chandler and I are actually working on creating a clear impact worksheet for our Essentia Health Fargo priority work, and you'll be able, once we have that complete, which we're working through it right now, we would be willing and able to share that. For community groups to get training on how to actually facilitate this and to facilitate for groups. Absolutely. We can talk about how we could support that. So we can follow up with the group on that to set up a follow-up meeting to talk about how we could move that forward. Any questions before we go for the day?
Yeah, just thank you so much, Karen, for spending this time putting this together and doing this with us, and for inviting all the different people here to be part of it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to help where I can. And so I think, Ken, I'll work with you on if we should set up a follow-up meeting for those that are interested in talking about how do we continue to support organizations with this work. We can create a plan.
That's a good idea. Okay. Good to see everyone, and thank you again, Karen.